Farmhand in Kansas discovered $7 million buried by the Latin kings in his field. The work was honest but grueling, and at 28 years old, Marcus had been doing it for nearly 5 years since moving back home from Kansas City. He'd left the city to escape a life that was heading nowhere good, trading the concrete jungle for endless fields and quiet nights. The metallic clang echoed again as his shovel struck the object. Marcus knelt down, brushing away the dark Kansas soil with his calloused hands. What emerged wasn't a rock or old farming equipment. It was the corner of a large waterproof container, military green and sealed tight. His heart began to race as he dug around the edges, revealing not one but 4 large containers buried about 3 feet deep in a section of the field that hadn't been plowed in years. If you're watching this, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. Now, back to what Marcus found that would change everything. With trembling hands, Marcus pried open the first container. Inside were stacks upon stacks of $100 bills, vacuum-sealed in plastic bags. His breath caught in his throat. He quickly opened another container. More money. And another. The 4th container held what looked like ledgers and documents, all marked with crown symbols and the letters Alkien. Marcus had grown up in Kansas City's rougher neighborhoods before cleaning up his life. He knew exactly what those symbols meant: Almighty Latin King and Queen Nation. The Latin kings had a presence in Kansas City, about 3 hours northeast, but their reach extended throughout the Midwest. Marcus's mind raced. This wasn't just some cash. This was serious money, drug money, blood money, the kind of money that people killed for without hesitation. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone, but then stopped. Who would he call? The police? What if there were dirty cops involved? What if someone was watching? The October wind picked up, carrying the scent of harvested wheat across the field. Marcus looked around the empty landscape. The Henderson farm sat isolated, with the nearest neighbor half a mile away. Old man Henderson was in his 70s and barely managed the property anymore, which was why he'd hired Marcus as the full-time farmhand. Henderson spent most of his time in town these days, leaving Marcus alone to maintain the operation. Marcus made a decision that would haunt him. He carefully covered the containers back up, marking the spot mentally, and continued his work on the irrigation line as if nothing had happened. But his mind was racing. $7 million. He'd counted quickly, but carefully. That kind of money could change his life. His sister Maria needed surgery for her daughter, his niece Sophia, who had a heart condition. The bills were crushing her. His mother was working 2 jobs just to keep their small house in Wichita, and Marcus himself. He was living in a converted barn on the Henderson property, sending most of his paycheck home. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in his small quarters, staring at the ceiling as the wind howled outside. The logical part of his brain screamed that he should report the money. But another part, the part that remembered growing up poor, that remembered watching his father work himself to death for pennies, whispered something different. Why should the people who buried that money get it back? They were criminals. The money was dirty anyway. Maybe this was fate. By morning, Marcus had convinced himself. He would take the money, but he'd be smart about it. He couldn't spend it all at once or in obvious ways. He'd have to be patient, careful. He waited until Henderson called to say he wouldn't be by the farm for a few days, some medical appointments in Topeka. That afternoon, Marcus loaded the 4 containers into his old pickup truck, covering them with tarps and farming equipment. He drove them to an abandoned grain silo on the far edge of the property, a structure so old and decrepit that Henderson had been meaning to tear it down for years. Marcus hauled the containers inside one by one, hiding them behind collapsed beams and rusted equipment. His body ached, but adrenaline kept him moving. When he finished, he sat in the darkness of the silo, surrounded by more money than he'd ever imagined, and allowed himself a moment of disbelief. The next few weeks passed in a strange haze. Marcus continued his daily routines, repairing fences, maintaining equipment, feeding the few livestock Henderson kept. But everything felt different now. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, that at any moment dangerous men would appear, demanding their money. He started jumping at every sound, every car that passed on the distant highway. Marcus began researching how to launder money, using the library computers in town rather than his phone. He learned about structured deposits, front businesses, and the dozens of ways people got caught. The more he learned, the more paranoid he became. The Latin Kings weren't some street gang. They were organized, connected, and ruthless. If they'd buried $7 million in a Kansas wheat field, they had plans to retrieve it. It was nearly 3 weeks after the discovery when Marcus first noticed the car, a black SUV with tinted windows, parked on the access road about a quarter-mile from the farm. It appeared in the late afternoon and was gone by morning. Marcus told himself he was being paranoid, that it could be anyone, hunters, surveyors, lost travelers. But it appeared again the next day, and the day after that. On the 4th day, Marcus watched through binoculars from the barn loft as 2 men got out of the SUV. Even from a distance, he could see the tattoos covering their arms, the way they moved with predatory confidence. They were scanning the fields, pointing at different areas. They were searching. His blood ran cold. That evening, Marcus made his first real mistake born of panic. He drove into Wichita and withdrew $5,000 from his savings account, everything he had. Then he went to a pawn shop in a rough neighborhood and bought a handgun. The dealer, a middle-aged man with suspicious eyes, didn't ask questions when Marcus paid cash. As Marcus left the shop with the weapon heavy in his jacket pocket, he realized he'd just crossed a line. He wasn't just hiding money anymore, he was preparing for violence. The next morning, Marcus was working on the tractor when a truck pulled into the farm's long driveway. It wasn't Henderson's vehicle. 2 Latino men got out, both in their 30s, wearing jeans and work shirts that didn't quite hide their gang tattoos. The one who spoke had a crown tattooed on his neck and cold, calculating eyes. "Morning," the man said, his accent slight but present. "We're looking for some work. Heard old Henderson might need extra hands for harvest season." Marcus kept his expression neutral, though his heart hammered in his chest. Harvest was last month. Nothing available right now. The second man, bulkier and quieter, walked slowly around the yard, his eyes scanning everything. "That's too bad," the first man continued. "We really need the work. Been traveling through, heard this was good farming country. You work here long?" "A few years," Marcus replied, keeping his answers short. "See anything interesting out here? It's pretty isolated. Bet you see all kinds of things in these fields." The question hung in the air, loaded with meaning. Marcus met the man's eyes. "Nothing interesting, just wheat and dirt." The tattooed man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's good. Sometimes people find things that don't belong to them. That can be dangerous, very dangerous." He let the words sink in before continuing. "We'll be around the area for a while, working some jobs in Wichita. Maybe we'll check back, see if Henderson needs help." They left, but Marcus knew they'd be back. They were probing, testing, watching. Someone had either seen him dig up the containers, or the Latin Kings had figured out the general area where their money was buried. Either way, Marcus was now directly in their sights. He'd thought finding the money was life-changing. He was right, but not in the way he'd imagined. This was just the beginning of a nightmare that would test everything he thought he knew about himself, about right and wrong, and about how far he'd go to protect the people he loved. The October sky darkened as storm clouds rolled in from the west, a cold front bringing the promise of rain and the kind of bitter wind that cut through jackets and rattled windows. Marcus stood in the doorway of his quarters, watching the Latin King's truck disappear down the road, knowing that his simple life as a farmhand had just become infinitely more complicated and dangerous. Marcus spent the next 2 days in a state of heightened alertness. He kept the gun close, tucked in his waistband when he worked outside, under his pillow when he slept. The weather had turned cold and grey, typical Kansas autumn weather that matched his darkening mood. He'd barely eaten, his stomach constantly churning with anxiety. Every time a vehicle passed on the distant highway, he'd freeze and watch until it disappeared from view. On the 3rd day after the Latin King's visit, Marcus drove into Wichita to see his sister Maria. She lived in a modest duplex on the east side, working as a nurse's aide while caring for 7-year-old Sophia. When Marcus arrived, Sophia was on the couch, her small frame looking even more fragile than usual. Maria's eyes were red from crying. "The surgery is scheduled for January," Maria said, pouring coffee in her cramped kitchen. "But I don't have the money, Marcus. Even with insurance, we're looking at $40,000 out of pocket. The payment plan would take me 20 years to pay off." Her voice cracked. "Sometimes I think about what happens if I can't give her this chance." Marcus felt the weight of the hidden money like a physical presence. $40,000. He had $7 million sitting in a grain silo. He could save Sophia's life with less than 1% of what he'd found. But if he gave Maria that money, he'd have to explain where it came from. And once he started spending it, the trail would begin. The Latin Kings would notice. The authorities might notice. "I'll figure something out," Marcus heard himself say. "I've got some money saved up. Let me see what I can do." Maria grabbed his hand, tears streaming down her face. "You've already done so much, I can't ask you for more." But Marcus had already decided he'd take the risk. Sophia deserved a chance at life more than criminals deserved their blood money. He'd just have to be incredibly careful about how he did it. That night, back at the farm, Marcus sat in the grain silo with a flashlight, examining the ledgers he'd found with the money. They were detailed records written partially in English and Spanish, documenting drug shipments, territory distributions, and payments. Names, dates, amounts, evidence that could destroy a major drug operation. This wasn't just money, it was information. Dangerous, valuable information. As he studied the documents, Marcus began to understand the scope of what he'd stumbled into. The Latin King's operation ran through multiple states: Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, Iowa. The money he'd found was likely a central reserve, buried in rural Kansas, specifically because it was off the radar. The organization had lost track of exactly where it was buried, hence the searching. Someone had either been arrested or killed before they could retrieve it or provide the exact location. A sound outside the silo froze Marcus in place. Footsteps. Multiple people. He quickly shut off his flashlight and pulled out his gun, his hands shaking. Through a gap in the old wood, he could see flashlight beams sweeping across the property. There were 3, maybe 4 people out there, moving systematically through the buildings. "Check the barn again," a voice called out in Spanish, "and that old silo. Look everywhere." Marcus's breathing became shallow. They were going to find him, find the money. He was trapped. The silo only had one entrance, and they were between him and it. His mind raced through scenarios, each one ending badly. If he tried to shoot his way out, he'd likely die. If he stayed hidden, they'd eventually find him. If he tried to reason with them, they'd kill him anyway. Witnesses were liabilities. Then another voice, older and authoritative, spoke in Spanish. "Enough. The old man's truck is coming up the road. We leave now. We'll come back when he's gone again." The footsteps retreated, and Marcus heard vehicle doors closing, engines starting. He waited in the darkness for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes before emerging from the silo. Henderson's truck was indeed parked by the main house, and lights were on inside. The old farmer had returned unexpectedly, inadvertently saving Marcus's life. Marcus walked to the house on shaking legs. Henderson answered the door, surprised to see him so late. "Everything all right, Marcus? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Mr. Henderson," Marcus said, "we need to talk." "Can I come in?" Sitting in Henderson's cluttered living room, surrounded by decades of farm life memories, Marcus made the hardest decision of his life. He told Henderson everything: the discovery, the money, the Latin Kings, all of it. He expected anger, fear, maybe even for Henderson to throw him off the property. Instead, the old farmer listened quietly, his weathered face unreadable. When Marcus finished, Henderson was silent for a long moment. Then he said something unexpected. "My son was killed by gang violence 23 years ago in Kansas City. Wrong place, wrong time. He wasn't involved in anything, just a college kid working a summer job at a convenience store." His eyes were distant, remembering. "The men who killed him were never caught. That money you found, it's bought with blood, Marcus. People like my son's blood." "I know," Marcus said. "I should have reported it immediately. But I thought about Sophia, about my family." Henderson raised a hand. "I understand why you hesitated, but you can't keep it. You know that, right? Those men will tear this property apart looking for it. They'll hurt anyone in their way, and if you spend it, you become part of their world." "What do I do?" Marcus asked, feeling lost. "We call the FBI," Henderson said firmly. "Not local police, FBI. They handle organized crime, and we do it smart. We document everything, we protect ourselves, and we tell the truth." Marcus felt a wave of relief mixed with regret. He'd known all along what the right thing was, but hearing Henderson say it made it real. "They'll take the money. Sophia won't get her surgery." Henderson stood up, walked to an old desk, and pulled out a checkbook. "How much does she need?" "Mr. Henderson, I can't—" "How much, Marcus?" $40,000. "But that's—" "I'm 74 years old," Henderson interrupted. "My wife passed 10 years ago. My son's been gone even longer. I've got no one to leave this farm to. I've got plenty of money sitting in the bank doing nothing." He started writing a check. "You saved this property from becoming a crime scene. You could have just taken the money and run, but you told the truth. That's worth something." Marcus felt tears burning his eyes. "I can't accept this." "You can, and you will." "For Sophia." Henderson finished writing and handed him the check. "Now, tomorrow morning we call the FBI. Tonight you get some sleep. Post someone you trust to watch the property. This is going to get complicated before it gets better." Marcus called his cousin Devon, who'd served in the army and now worked security in Wichita. Devon arrived within 2 hours, armed and alert, agreeing to watch the property overnight. Marcus barely slept, lying in his quarters with his gun on the nightstand, listening to every sound in the darkness. Morning came with clear skies and bitter cold. At 8 a.m. sharp, Henderson called the FBI field office in Kansas City. He explained the situation calmly and clearly: money buried on his property, gang activity, threats. Within 3 hours, 2 federal agents arrived at the farm in an unmarked sedan. Agent Sarah Reeves was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and professional. Her partner, Agent Tom Costa, was younger, but carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd seen plenty of action. They listened to Marcus's story, taking detailed notes, asking pointed questions about the Latin Kings members he'd encountered. "You did the right thing calling us," Agent Reeves said after hearing everything, "but I won't lie to you. You're in danger. The Latin Kings don't forget, and they don't forgive. $7 million is a significant loss for them." "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "We secure the money as evidence," Agent Costa explained. "We use it to build a case against the organization. Those ledgers you mentioned are potentially more valuable than the cash. They could help us take down a major trafficking operation." "And Marcus?" Henderson asked. "What protection does he get?" Agent Reeves met Marcus's eyes directly. "We can offer witness protection if it comes to that. But that's a big decision. New identity, new location, cutting ties with everyone you know. For now, we'll increase patrols in this area and we'll move quickly on arrests. The Latin King's leadership doesn't know for certain that you have their money or that we're involved. We want to keep it that way as long as possible." The agents spent the rest of the day documenting everything. They photographed the containers, catalogued every dollar, scanned every page of the ledgers. A forensics team arrived to process the burial site for evidence. The operation was professional, efficient, and surreal. Marcus watched as strangers systematically dismantled the secret that had consumed his life for weeks. By evening, the money was loaded into FBI vehicles and driven away under armed escort. The agents left behind surveillance equipment and emergency contact numbers. "Stay vigilant," Agent Reeves told Marcus before leaving. "If you see anything suspicious, anyone suspicious, you call us immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself." That night, Marcus sat with Henderson on the farmhouse porch, despite the cold. Devon was still on watch, patrolling the property with military precision. The stars were brilliant in the clear Kansas sky, the kind of night that usually brought Marcus peace. But tonight, he felt only uncertainty. "I gave my sister the check today," Marcus said quietly. "She cried for an hour. Sophia's surgery is scheduled. They're optimistic about her chances." Henderson nodded. "Good. That's what matters." "But what about after?" Marcus continued. "Even if the FBI arrests the people responsible, someone in the gang will remember me. They'll come looking eventually." "Maybe," Henderson acknowledged, "or maybe the FBI breaks up their operation so thoroughly that they've got bigger problems than revenge. Maybe the word spreads that the money's gone, evidence secured, case being built, and smart criminals cut their losses and run." "You really believe that?" Marcus asked. "I believe," Henderson said slowly, "that you can't live your life in fear of what might happen. You did the right thing. You have to trust that doing the right thing means something, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." The next 2 weeks were tense but quiet. Agent Reeves called every few days with updates. The FBI was using the ledgers to build cases against multiple gang members. Several arrests had been made, though the leadership remained elusive. The surveillance at the farm showed no suspicious activity. It seemed like maybe, just maybe, the worst was over. Marcus visited Sophia in the hospital the day before her surgery. She was scared, but trying to be brave, talking about what she wanted to do after she got better. Soccer, dance classes, normal kid things. Maria pulled Marcus aside, her gratitude evident in every word. "I don't know how to thank you, and Mr. Henderson. You saved her life." "She's family," Marcus said simply. "That's what family does." The surgery was successful. Sophia would need months of recovery and therapy, but the doctors were optimistic. Marcus felt a weight lift from his chest, the first genuine happiness he'd felt since finding the money. For a few days, life almost felt normal again. He worked the farm, had dinner with Henderson a few times, even went to a movie in town with Devon. Then everything fell apart. It was late November, the day before Thanksgiving. Marcus was in the barn repairing a tractor when he heard vehicles approaching fast. Multiple vehicles. He grabbed his gun and ran to the window. 3 SUVs were coming up the driveway, moving with obvious aggressive intent. This wasn't a subtle visit. Marcus pulled out his phone and called the FBI emergency number with shaking hands. "They're here," he said when Agent Costa answered. "Multiple vehicles. Armed, I think. I need help now." "Get inside the house with Henderson," Costa said urgently. Lock the doors. Don't engage. We're 15 minutes out. State police are closer. Stay on the line. But Marcus couldn't reach the house. The vehicle stopped, blocking his path. Doors opened and 8 men got out, several openly carrying weapons. The man with the crown tattoo from before was there, but now there was someone else, older, clearly in charge, with a face marked by old scars and a demeanor that radiated danger. Marcus Webb, the older man said, his English perfect and unaccented. We've been looking for you. Well, looking for what you found. Where is it? Marcus stood in the barn doorway, his hand on his gun but not drawing it. Drawing would mean dying. The FBI has it. It's evidence in a federal investigation. I reported it. It's gone. The older man's expression barely changed, but something cold flickered in his eyes. That was very stupid. You've cost us a significant amount of money and, worse, you've given the government ammunition to use against us. Do you know what we do to people who cooperate with the FBI? I know what you do to innocent people, Marcus said, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. I know that money was earned through misery and death. I know keeping it would make me part of that. So yeah, I reported it. And right now, there are FBI agents and state police on their way here. You've got maybe 10 minutes before this place is surrounded. The older man studied him for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He laughed. Not a warm laugh, but one of genuine amusement, mixed with respect. You've got courage, I'll give you that. Standing there outnumbered, outgunned, and you still talk like you got a choice. Everyone's got a choice, Marcus replied. You've got one right now. You can leave before the cops get here, or you can stay and guarantee yourself a long prison sentence. That money's gone. Killing me doesn't get it back. The man with the crown tattoo stepped forward angrily, but the older man held up a hand, stopping him. Actually, you're right. The money is gone. But principles matter, Marcus. If word gets out that someone can steal from us, cooperate with the feds and walk away, that's bad for business. It encourages others to try the same thing. In the distance, sirens began to wail. The older man heard them too. His jaw tightened. This isn't over. You understand that, right? You've made yourself a marked man. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. We don't forget. Then I guess I better live a life worth remembering, Marcus said. The older man studied him one more time, then nodded to his men. They began moving back to their vehicles. But before getting in, the man turned back one last time. That little girl getting heart surgery. Your niece, Sophia. She's at Kansas University Medical Center, room 437. Pretty name, Sophia. Marcus's blood went ice cold. The threat was clear. Touch me and the people I love die. The man smiled at the recognition in Marcus's eyes, then got in the SUV. All 3 vehicles pulled away just as state police cars came screaming up the driveway from the opposite direction. The next hours were chaos. Multiple law enforcement agencies descended on the farm. Marcus gave statement after statement, describing each man, recounting every word. The FBI launched an immediate operation to protect Maria and Sophia, moving them to a secure location within hours. Agent Reeves sat with Marcus in Henderson's kitchen late that night. We got photographs of everyone who was here today. We're identifying them now. The older man you described, we think that's Alejandro Ruiz, one of the regional leaders. If we can make a case stick, it's a major victory. He threatened my niece, Marcus said, his voice hollow. He knows where she is, her room number, her name. We've got her protected, Reeves assured him. 24-hour security. But Marcus, we need to talk seriously about witness protection now. These people won't stop. Even with arrests, the organization persists. You're never going to be completely safe if you stay here. So I give up my life, my family, my identity, because I did the right thing. Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything, she said quietly. I know it's not fair. But it's the reality. Marcus looked at Henderson, who'd been sitting silently through the whole conversation. The old farmer's face was thoughtful. "There might be another way," Henderson said slowly. "Marcus, you said those ledgers contained information about the entire operation, right? Names, locations, distribution networks." Agent Reeves nodded cautiously. "Yes, we're building multiple cases from that information. Why? Because if you take down the entire organization, not just a few members, but the whole structure, then there's no one left to seek revenge," Henderson explained. "The people who know Marcus's name, his face, his connection to this, if they're all in prison, then the threat ends." "That's a big if," Reeves said. "These operations are like Hydra heads. Cut one off and another grows back." "But it's possible?" Marcus asked, grasping at the hope. "It's possible," Reeves admitted. "The information you provided is extensive. With proper resources and coordination with other agencies, we could launch a major operation. But it would take time, months, maybe longer, and in that time, you'd need to be careful, very careful." Over the following weeks, as Thanksgiving passed and December brought snow to the Kansas plains, Marcus learned to live in a strange new reality. He continued working the farm, but with constant awareness of his surroundings. Federal agents maintained surveillance on the property. Maria and Sophia remained in protective custody, though Marcus was able to visit them in secure locations. The FBI's investigation expanded rapidly. The ledgers Marcus found proved to be a roadmap to one of the Midwest's largest drug trafficking operations. Agent Reeves kept Marcus updated on the progress. Dozens of search warrants executed, major seizures of drugs and weapons, arrests across 5 states. The operation targeted not just the Latin Kings, but also their distribution networks and corrupt officials who'd been on their payroll. Sophia recovered from her surgery remarkably well. By Christmas, she was home, under the watchful eyes of federal marshals, but healthy and happy. Marcus spent Christmas Day with his family in a safe house outside of Wichita, and for a few hours, he could almost forget the danger hanging over them. "Uncle Marcus," Sophia said, hugging him tight, "Mom says we can't go home yet because bad people are around, but the FBI lady says you're a hero. Is that true?" Marcus knelt down to her level, touching the scar on her chest where the surgeons had operated. "I just tried to do the right thing, mija. That's all any of us can do." "Mom says doing the right thing is always right, even when it's hard," Sophia replied with the simple wisdom of children. "Your mom is a smart woman," Marcus said, fighting back tears. In January, the FBI launched Operation Crown Fall, a coordinated strike against the Latin Kings' Midwest operation. Over 3 days, federal, state, and local law enforcement conducted simultaneous raids across Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, Iowa, and Illinois. Over 200 arrests were made, including Alejandro Ruiz and most of the organization's leadership. The sweep was unprecedented in its scope and effectiveness. Agent Reeves called Marcus the day after the operation concluded. "It's over. We got them all. The ones we didn't arrest are running scared. Their whole structure collapsed." "You're safe, Marcus. You and your family are safe." Marcus sat down heavily, the relief overwhelming. "It's really over?" "Really over. You'll still need to testify when trials begin, but the immediate threat is gone. You can go back to your life." When Marcus told Henderson the news, the old farmer smiled for the first time in months. "I told you doing the right thing matters. I told you it would work out." "It almost didn't," Marcus pointed out. "We got lucky." "Now maybe," Henderson conceded, "but luck favors the righteous sometimes, or at least I like to think so." Life slowly returned to a new version of normal. Maria and Sophia moved back home. Though Marcus convinced them to accept Henderson's help in moving to a better neighborhood, Marcus continued working the farm, and Henderson, energized by the excitement, became more involved in the day-to-day operations again. The trials began in the spring. Marcus testified in 3 separate proceedings, identifying the men who'd threatened him, explaining how he'd found the money, detailing the fear he'd experienced. It was difficult reliving those moments, but each time he looked at the defendants and saw how their organized crime had destroyed lives, he felt vindicated in his choices. Alejandro Ruiz received a 30-year sentence. The man with the crown tattoo got 20 years. Others received various sentences, but the key fact was that the organization's power in the region was shattered. The FBI estimated that Operation Crown Fall had disrupted over $60 million in drug trafficking annually and prevented countless deaths from violence and overdoses. One warm afternoon in May, Marcus was working on planting when a car pulled up to the farm. He tensed momentarily. Old habits die hard, but relaxed when he saw it was Agent Reeves. She got out, smiling. "Just wanted to check in," she said. "See how you're doing." "Good," Marcus replied honestly. "Still here, still working. No threats, no problems." "That's what I like to hear." She paused, then added, "I wanted you to know something. That money you found, the $7 million? Once the legal proceedings are complete, probably another year or 2, there'll be a forfeiture process. A portion of seized criminal assets sometimes goes to crime victims and people who help law enforcement. You might see some compensation." Marcus shook his head. "I don't want it. I never wanted it. Give it to victims' families, drug treatment programs, whatever helps fix the damage that money caused." Reeves studied him with respect. "You know, in my 20 years with the FBI, I've seen a lot of people faced with the choice you had. Most don't make the decision you made. Most take the money and run, or freeze up, or try to play both sides. You chose the hard path." "It felt like the only path," Marcus said. "That's what makes you different," she replied. After she left, Marcus stood in the Kansas field where this had all begun, looking at the spot where he'd unearthed those containers months ago. The earth had been plowed and planted since then, new crops growing from old soil. In a way, that felt right. Life continuing, things growing from what came before. He thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the danger, the impossible choices. He thought about Sophia, healthy and thriving, already back in school and talking about playing soccer. He thought about Henderson, who'd shown him that wealth wasn't always measured in money and that doing right by people mattered more than personal gain. Most of all, Marcus thought about the man he'd been when he found that money, someone who'd left Kansas City to escape temptation and start fresh. He'd been tested in ways he never imagined, and he'd discovered something important. Character isn't who you are when things are easy. It's who you are when everything is on the line. As the sun set over the Kansas plains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Marcus returned to work. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and new opportunities to choose who he wanted to be. But tonight, he was content. He'd found something far more valuable than $7 million buried in a field. He'd found himself.